Welcome back to Sip&Talk. I'm Joe.
And I'm Sunny. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world.
Welcome. So I want to start with a weirdly common experience. Have you ever been with a group of friends, talking about something you all definitely experienced together, a trip, a concert, whatever?
Oh, yeah. I think I know where this is going.
Right. And suddenly one person just looks at you blankly and says, I don't remember that happening at all.
And it completely short-circuits the conversation. You're all just staring at them like, how is that even possible?
Exactly. It's that strange, unsettling feeling. Okay, now, I want you to take that personal memory glitch and just scale it up. Scale it up by 100 million, maybe more. And what you get is the topic for today. We're talking about a kind of national-level selective memory loss, this concept of national amnesia.
And that's a great starting point, but I think we need to be really precise here.
Yeah.
This isn't just forgetting. This is not a passive thing. In the context of modern China, it's a massive, organized, heavily funded project.
A memory engineering project. The goal isn't just for the nation to forget. It's to manufacture forgetfulness.
Manufacturing forgetfulness. Wow, that phrase is chilling.
It should be. And we've all just witnessed the most recent and maybe most blatant example of this in real time. Let's talk about the Hong Kong anti-extradition movement.
Right, 2019.
Exactly. For most of us watching from the outside, what we saw was just spectacular. Millions of people in the streets fighting for their promised freedoms, their judicial independence. It was this incredible display of civic will.
A whole city on its feet.
But if you look at the official narrative from Beijing, it's completely different. It is, without any ambiguity, classified as black violence, orchestrated by, and this is the key phrase, external hostile forces.
Classic bogeyman.
It's the go-to move. And so that memory, the one of millions of ordinary citizens marching peacefully at first, that has to be completely formatted, erased, and replaced with this new version.
And that's the critical part, isn't it? The replacement. Because you hear officials now constantly repeating this mantra, Hong Kong is stable now, society is harmonious.
All thanks to the central government's decisive action.
Exactly. It's like those marches, 16,000 tear gas canisters, the street clashes. It's as if none of that ever happened. Or if it did, it was just some illusion created by foreign media.
And that raises a really terrifying question.
It does. If they can successfully rewrite the memory of something so recent, so well documented as Hong Kong, and turn it into this new truth right before our eyes, then what about the older histories?
The deeper, more painful ones.
The ones where there weren't thousands of international journalists with iPhones recording everything?
That is the mission for us today at Sip&Talk. We are basically pulling out our memory checklist. We're going to go through some of the most sensitive, most core amnesia zones in the official historical narrative of the CCP.
Okay, where are we starting?
We're going to work our way back. We'll start with Tiananmen Square, then we'll look at the Cultural Revolution, and finally that huge, almost unimaginable catastrophe, the Great Famine. And through it all, we're going to keep asking three core questions.
Okay, lay them out for us.
First, how are the actual records, the archives, the photos, the documents, how are they systematically destroyed or just locked away from anyone who might ask questions?
The physical act of erasing history.
Second, how is the new truth built? How is it inserted into society? Through textbooks, through state media, through that massive censorship machine.
So how they fill the vacuum they've created.
Precisely. And third, and this is maybe the most important question for you, the listener, can people really be made to forget? Can individual memory, family stories, can that be an antidote to this state-driven memory engineering?
Okay, let's get into it. Let's start unpacking this masterful technique of memory control. And you're right, we have to start with the heaviest, the most completely erased event, Tiananmen Square, 1989.
The spring and summer of 1989, leading up to the military crackdown on June 4th, it remains. Well, it's the absolute third rail of modern Chinese history. It is the most sensitive, most heavily censored event, period.
It's almost hard to comprehend, really, the sheer scale of that event with so many witnesses, so much footage, and yet for entire generations of Chinese citizens, it's basically a historical blank page.
When we say systemic erasure, what does that actually look like on the ground?
It is a multi-layered, technologically sophisticated operation that never stops. And it all begins with systemic destruction and digital censorship, captained, of course, by the Great Firewall.
Right.
And we have to be clear, the censorship here isn't just reactive. It's not waiting for someone to post something and then taking it down. It's proactive. It's predictive. Keywords related to the event, I mean, the obvious ones like 6-4, Tiananmen incident, or Tank Man, those are designated as the highest level sensitive terms you can have.
And we see the effects of this every year around the anniversary, don't we? The internet in China just seems to get slower, glitchier. That's the annual digital lockdown. Every year, around early June, the entire digital infrastructure goes into this heightened state of alert. But it's so much deeper than just blocking a few obvious words. This is where it becomes a kind of digital ghost hunt.
What do you mean by ghost hunt?
They hunt for even the most veiled, the most subtle references. Internet users, for years, have created this whole coded language to talk about it.
Like using different numbers or something?
Exactly. Things like 8964, or the really common one, May 35th.
May 35th. Wait, why that? It sounds deliberately absurd.
It is. That's the point. It's a workaround. May has 31 days, so May 31st plus 4 days is June 4th. It's the 35th of May.
That's brilliant and incredibly sad at the same time.
It is. But here's the thing. The state's AI and their armies of human sensors have been trained to recognize these tricks. An algorithm will spot May 35th and instantly delete it. The system is designed to hunt down and eliminate these ghosts of memory before they can spread.
So if you're a young person in China using domestic search engines like Baidu, and you type in Tiananmen Square, what do you see?
You see a beautiful, peaceful tourist destination. You'll see pictures of the gate, of families flying kites. There is nothing about 1989. For millions, the memory isn't suppressed. The initial historical data was never even acquired.
A total information vacuum. But that's the digital world. What about the physical world? The official histories, the school textbooks?
That's the next layer. We can call it academic and educational scrubbing. It's just as thorough. In official high school and university history textbooks, the event is either completely omitted.
It's just not there.
It's just not there. It's treated as a non-event in the grand story of the PRC. Or in some slightly older versions, it might be reduced to a single, heavily sanitized sentence.
What does that sentence typically say?
Something to the effect of, a political turmoil that was successfully quelled by the Central Committee. Sometimes the phrase is countering turmoil. The language is sterile, passive, and completely devoid of detail.
And what about scholars inside China? Can a historian decide to research this?
Absolutely not. It's impossible. You cannot get access to the archives. You can't interview key figures. You certainly can't publish any findings that contradict the official line. It's a complete academic dead zone. The physical evidence, the original footage, the iconic photographs, it's either been destroyed or it's locked away in the deepest state archives, never to see the light of day.
Which, of course, makes it much, much easier to establish the new truth you were talking about. If the real history is a vacuum, you can fill it with whatever you want.
And they have. The official narrative that fills that void is rigid, and it has remained essentially unchanged since 1989.
Which is what?
The event was a counter-revolutionary riot, a battle of one. And that word riot is so important. It frames the participants not as citizens, but as criminals.
And instigated by?
Instigated by a tiny minority of disloyal troublemakers who are, of course, being manipulated and funded by those external hostile forces.
The narrative never changes.
It's remarkably consistent. The term counter-revolutionary is also critical. It frames the protesters not as people asking for reforms like, say, an end to corruption, but as traitors trying to overthrow the entire system.
So with that framing in place, how do they justify the military action, the tanks, the violence?
The justification is a single powerful word: stability. The official line is that using force, what they call decisive measures, was absolutely necessary to maintain social stability.
The argument being that the alternative was chaos.
Exactly. They argue that if the government hadn't acted, China would have collapsed into chaos, maybe like the Soviet Union did shortly after, or fallen back into the horror of the Cultural Revolution. It's a powerful rhetorical move.
It really is. It takes what was a huge internal political crisis where citizens were demanding things like democracy and accountability for corruption, and it reframes it as a simple act of national self-defense.
A defense against foreign aggression and internal chaos. The purpose is twofold. First, you retroactively legitimize the violence by saying it saved the nation. Second, and this is key for the long term, you ensure that younger generations never even learn about the pro-democracy ideals that actually fueled the protests in the first place.
So if you never know what they were asking for, the story that the military saved China from collapsing becomes the default setting, the only history you've ever known.
It becomes the unchallenged truth. And that really sets a chilling precedent for how other older histories can be managed.
Okay, so we've talked about total erasure. That seems to be the strategy for a more recent, globally visible event where you just need a clean break. But what happens when you can't just erase the memory?
You mean when too many people live through it?
Exactly. Tens of millions of people have personal, vivid memories of events like the Cultural Revolution or the Great Famine. You can't just pretend those didn't happen.
No, you can't. And that's where the strategy shifts. It moves from total erasure to something more subtle. It becomes about revisionism. It's like applying a historical Band-Aid. You acknowledge something bad happened, but you carefully shift the blame, or you minimize the scale of the disaster to protect the central leadership.
It's damage control for history.
That's a perfect way to put it. The state has to acknowledge the event to maintain a basic level of credibility with the older generations. But they have to spin it to deflect accountability, to protect the party's foundational myth of being, wise and infallible.
Okay, let's start with the Cultural Revolution. For so many older Chinese citizens, that decade from 66 to 76 was just a nightmare. Political terror, families torn apart.
It was a national earthquake. And what's crucial to understand here is that the old truth about it was actually established by the party itself.
What do you mean?
In 1981, they released this landmark document, a long resolution on the party's history. And in it, they officially defined the Cultural Revolution as a severe catastrophe. The word they used was haoji, which is very strong, like Holocaust or calamity.
So they admitted it was a disaster.
They did. They stated it was wrongly initiated by Mao Zedong and that it caused immense damage to the party, the country, and the people. It was a clear, if maybe limited, admission of a massive systemic failure. We're talking about an event where an estimated 1 to 2 million people died and tens of millions more were persecuted.
So the party itself said this was a catastrophe caused by our leader. But now, decades later, we're seeing that narrative start to shift. This new truth is creeping in. How do they do that without just openly contradicting their own official resolution from 1981?
They do it with surgical precision. It's a masterpiece of minimization. The first thing they do is they minimize the word catastrophe itself. You see it less and less.
What do they replace it with?
It gets reframed. Instead of a devastating political civil war that destroyed the nation's culture and society, it's now often described as merely a setback or detour in exploring the socialist path.
Wow. That's some world-class corporate spin right there. We didn't have a catastrophic failure. We had a valuable learning experience.
That is exactly the logic. It wasn't a crime against the people. It was an unfortunate but maybe necessary bump in the road to national greatness. And the main mechanism for this is, again, the textbooks.
They just rewrite the school books.
They shrink the chapter, the negative parts, the terror, the public humiliation sessions, the mass violence of the Red Guards. Those details are simplified or just omitted entirely. The focus shifts.
Cool.
The focus shifts to the correction that happened after 1976. They talk about how the chaos ended and how it led to the glorious period of economic reform under Deng Xiaoping, the death toll, the ideological violence. It all just sort of fades into the historical background.
So what's the ultimate political role of this editing? Why is it so important for them to soften the image of Mao and this decade of terror?
Because the narrative goal is to protect the historical reputation and the legitimacy of the party's core leaders, especially Mao Zedong. Think about it. If the Cultural Revolution is honestly portrayed as a decade-long, deliberate catastrophe initiated by the paramount leader,
it calls the whole system into question.
it invites a fundamental questioning of the party's supreme leadership model, of the entire ideology. So by softening the language, by subtly shifting the blame to secondary figures like the Gang of Four, they could acknowledge the chaos happened without undermining the party's right to rule or the idea that a strong central leader is necessary.
Let's move to an even bigger event, at least in terms of human life lost. The Great Famine from the late 50s to early 60s. Historians consistently call this one of the deadliest man-made disasters of the 20th century.
And the numbers are they're difficult to wrap your head around. The established academic consensus, the old truth of the famine, is that it was overwhelmingly a man-made disaster.
Not a natural one.
No. It was a direct result of the Great Leap Forward policies. Specifically, things like forcing all farmers into people's communes, the obsession with making steel and backyard furnaces instead of farming.
Right, melting down their own farm tools.
Exactly. And most critically, the catastrophic system of fabricating grain output figures. It was called sending rockets to the sky. Local officials would report these massive, completely fictitious harvests to please the central leadership.
And the central government believed them.
They procured grain based on those fake numbers. They took real grain from the countryside to feed the cities and for export based on harvests that never existed. It left the rural population with literally nothing.
So this was beyond poor planning. This was an ideological policy failure combined with a system of deadly lies. And the result was, what, 30, 40 million deaths?
The estimates are generally between 30 and 45 million abnormal deaths from starvation, from disease related to malnutrition. The scale is almost incomprehensible. So how does the new truth handle an event of that magnitude?
How do you spin that?
You stick to the original officially sanctioned label, the 3 years of natural disasters.
Ah, there it is. The ultimate blame deflection. Blame the weather.
Precisely. They can't deny that millions of people died. But the official story relentlessly emphasizes external factors. They'll talk about bad weather patterns. They'll talk about having to repay debts to the Soviet Union.
Anything but the policy itself.
And they'll claim the problem was just local government execution errors. You know, the low-level officials were the ones lying, not the central planners in Beijing. By constantly highlighting weather and local mistakes, they minimize the fatal role that Mao's central policies played.
So they just pushed the blame down the chain of command.
All the way down. It isolates the top leadership from the consequences of their ideology. The narrative goal is to shield them from responsibility. Because if the party were to admit that the Great Leap Forward directly caused tens of millions of deaths, it would completely shatter the image of the party's wisdom and infallibility.
So they transform a systemic policy failure into just bad luck with the rain.
Unfortunate and unavoidable weather. And that brings us to the present day.
Right. We've seen the historical playbook. Total erasure for an event like Tiananmen, and blame shifting for internal disasters like the famine. Now we can look at how those same techniques were applied in real time under the full glare of the global media. The 2019 Hong Kong protests.
This is the ultimate case study. It's a modern, field-tested narrative war. And the speed and the thoroughness with which Beijing established its version of events shows just how refined these methods have become.
Before we get into the narrative battle, let's just set the scene. What was the actual trigger for that massive political firestorm?
The initial spark was a proposed revision to something called the Fugitive Offenders Ordinance, basically the extradition bill. And while it was prompted by a specific murder case in Taiwan, the real fear was about the long-term erosion of Hong Kong's independence.
People were afraid it would allow Beijing to just reach in and grab anyone they wanted.
That was exactly the fear, that it would allow them to extradite political dissidents, journalists, anyone critical of the regime, to the mainland's opaque, party-controlled court system. It would effectively dissolve the legal firewall that was supposed to separate Hong Kong from the mainland.
And this wasn't happening in a vacuum. This was building on years of tension, right?
Absolutely. This came after the failure of the 2014 umbrella movement to achieve its goals. There was this deep, simmering distrust. People felt that the promise of universal suffrage was being denied, that their freedoms were being slowly suffocated.
And the movement just grew and grew. What were the numbers like at the peak?
At its height, organizers estimated maybe 1 million, some say up to 2 million people were on the streets. That's nearly a quarter of the entire population of Hong Kong protesting one bill.
It's staggering. And when the government refused to fully withdraw the bill, the movement radicalized.
It did. It coalesced around the 5 demands, which included things like an independent inquiry into police conduct and, of course, universal suffrage. And the state's response became incredibly harsh.
Unprecedented for Hong Kong.
Totally. Over the course of the most intense months, the police fired an estimated 16,000 canisters of tear gas, about 10,000 rubber bullets. We all saw the images of the huge clashes, the occupation of the airport, and those dramatic sieges of the university campuses.
And the end result of all this, the permanent consequence, was the national security law.
That changed everything. The protests were largely quieted by the start of the COVID pandemic, and Beijing seized that moment. In June of 2020, they bypassed Hong Kong's own legislature and imposed the national security law directly.
And the consequences were immediate.
Severe and immediate. Mass arrests, somewhere between 10 and 12,000 people. A huge wave of emigration, with over 100,000 people leaving for the UK alone. And the complete overhaul of the political system, which led to voter turnout just plummeting from over 70% to under 30%.
Yes.
Essentially institutionalized political silence.
Okay, so those are the facts on the ground. Now let's get into the narrative war. How does Beijing frame these events versus how the protesters and the international community see them?
This is where you see the memory engineering machine go into overdrive. Beijing's narrative is singular, it's forceful, and it's a direct application of the playbook we've been talking about.
Let me guess. Black violence caused by external forces.
You got it in one. The core assertion is that the entire movement was a violent, systematic attack on social order. They point to the real economic damage, the disruption to daily life. And the villain is not any local dissatisfaction.
It's the external hand.
The external hand. They explicitly label the movement a color revolution or an anti-China proxy war. Any evidence of foreign contact, a U.S. politician meeting a protest leader, any funding from a pro-democracy group, is held up as irrefutable proof of foreign manipulation.
Which allows them to completely dismiss the legitimacy of the protesters' actual demands.
It erases them. It transforms a massive local movement into a simple case of us versus them. And in that framing, the national security law is not an act of suppression.
It's a necessary surgery to restore order.
Correct. It's justified as the responsible action that brought Hong Kong from chaos to governance and prosperity. And that narrative is incredibly effective for a domestic audience inside the Great Firewall, where the number one fear is always chaos.
Okay, so that's one side. What about the other narrative? The one from the protesters and their supporters, which they call civic resistance.
Their core assertion is that the movement was rooted in a very real, very local fear, that Beijing was systematically dismantling Hong Kong's promised autonomy. It was a defensive fight for rights that were supposed to be guaranteed.
But what about the violence from some protesters? The Molotov cocktails, the vandalism, how does that fit into the resistance framing?
That narrative acknowledges the violence, but it argues that it was an escalatory reaction.
A reaction to what?
A reaction to two things. First, the government's complete refusal to listen to massive, peaceful protests. And second, the police's increasingly excessive and indiscriminate use of force. They argue that when you fire 16,000 rounds of tear gas into your own city, you create an environment where some level of retaliatory violence becomes almost inevitable.
And the external forces argument is seen as, what, just a smokescreen?
It's seen as a deflection tactic, a way for Beijing to avoid admitting that there was genuine, organic political discontent on its own territory.
Now, this whole narrative war was fueled by a series of really disturbing controversies that led to a complete breakdown of public trust, right?
A near-total collapse of trust between the Hong Kong public and its institutions, especially the police force. And these controversies created an information vacuum where suspicion and fear just flourished.
Let's talk about the issue of the suicides. There are these widespread rumors of forced suicides.
This was one of the most tragic and sensitive parts of the whole conflict. There was a measurable rise in youth suicides during that period, linked to the immense stress and fear. And certain cases, like a 15-year-old girl whose body was found at sea, became flashpoints.
Because the official rulings of suicide or accident were being challenged by the public? Why?
The doubt came from a total collapse of transparency. The police would close these cases very quickly, sometimes in just a week or two, and critics would immediately allege forced suicides, implying foul play was being covered up. The police's refusal to release crucial evidence, like full, unedited security camera footage, just poured gasoline on the fire of public distrust.
So when institutions aren't transparent, they basically create the perfect breeding ground for conspiracy theory.
Exactly. Every official explanation is treated as a lie. And that leads directly to the core allegation against the police, the black police phenomenon.
What did people mean when they used that term, black police?
It was an accusation of severe misconduct, excessive force, and critically, collusion with organized crime. International groups like Amnesty documented over 100 specific instances of alleged police abuse, from close-range shootings to torture in detention.
And the Yuan Long incident became the symbol of that alleged collusion.
It was the defining moment. Hundreds of white-clad men, believed to be triad gang members, brutally attacked citizens and protesters at a train station. And the police were documented to have a 39-minute delayed response.
39 minutes.
It was so suspicious that it led to widespread accusations of police gang collusion. And a federal watchdog cleared the force, but the international expert panel that was invited to review that very investigation resigned in protest, saying the watchdog lacked any real independence.
So the international verdict was that the investigation was incredible.
Pretty much. And the final layer here was the use of undercover police who were accused of acting as agents provocateurs.
Police officers pretending to be protesters?
Exactly. The police admitted to using them. But video surfaced, showing officers dressed exactly like protesters. Black shirts, helmets beating people and making arrests. The allegation was that they weren't just observing, they were actively inciting violence to create the visual evidence of black violence that the state narrative needed.
Creating the chaos they needed to justify the crackdown.
Precisely. This all shows that when memory engineering happens in real time, the battle begins by deliberately destroying public trust in the very institutions that are supposed to uphold order and truth.
Which brings us back to that core, really Orwellian question we started with. If a fact is successfully erased from the public record and it's replaced by a new truth that everyone is forced to accept, did the original event ever really happen for most people?
That is the goal of state-sponsored memory engineering. And the sad, short-term answer is, yes, the new truth can absolutely dominate the collective mind.
How is that power so absolute?
Well, first you have the imposition of what you could call an information monoculture. For the generations raised entirely behind the Great Firewall, the official narrative is the only one they've ever known. The memory isn't deleted from their minds because the source data was never downloaded in the first place.
It's not a struggle to forget the past, it's a struggle to even find it.
And that struggle is reinforced by very powerful tools of social and economic coercion. For the older people, the ones who did live through Tiananmen or the Cultural Revolution, the choice to speak out comes with an immense personal price.
So they just stay silent.
They choose to lock the memory away. It's a survival strategy for your job, for your family's safety, for your ability to just live a normal life. The fear factor, losing your job, being imprisoned for challenging the narrative, is strong enough to maintain a collective, convenient forgetfulness.
So silence becomes a form of complicity.
And complicity allows the new truth to solidify. But there is hope. There are things that can push back against this massive machine.
Okay, I was hoping you'd say that. What is the pushback?
It resides in the resilience of personal memory, what some call underground history.
The stories that refuse to be extinguished.
Right. The first source of that resilience is simply living witnesses and oral history. The stories passed down within families from survivors of the famine, groups like the Tiananmen mothers who for decades have demanded accountability. Their continued existence is a form of living historical record. Their presence puts a moral cost on the state's revisionism.
And what about technology? Can the thing that builds the cage also be used to break it?
It's a constant battle. But yes, people use encrypted communication, VPNs, even things like the blockchain to try and transmit fragments of the truth. A censored article, a historical photo. It is a perpetual high-stakes race between the truth trying to leak out and the censor trying to patch the holes.
You also mentioned the Hong Kong difference earlier. Why is the memory of 2019 potentially harder to completely erase than the memory of the Cultural Revolution?
And that's maybe the most encouraging sign. For those older events, most of the original contemporaneous records were either destroyed long ago or were never public to begin with. But because Hong Kong had a free press and an independent legal system for so long,
there's a massive paper trail.
A massive digital and physical trail. Extensive news reports, court documents, high-definition videos, legally verified evidence. And much of that has been preserved and archived by international institutions, universities, and media organizations well outside of Beijing's control.
So they can't just make it all disappear.
It makes the historical rewrite significantly harder to pull off, at least on a global scale. In the end, this battle for memory is really a race against time. The state tries to use the passage of time to wash away memory and fill the void with its new truth.
Then the counter-effort.
The counter-effort has to be a race to record, to transmit, and to preserve that truth. Because as long as one person remembers, and as long as that memory is safely archived somewhere, the truth hasn't completely vanished.
That is a powerful and honestly a pretty sobering thought to end on. We've spent this session on Sip&Talk really examining how a powerful state structures its past and its present into one single self-serving story.
And the goal here is purely analytical. We're not criticizing any one nation, but looking at the universal mechanisms of narrative control. And the core strategy, the one we've seen again and again, is this technique of externalizing the problem.
Right. When things go wrong, it's never our fault.
It's never central policy failure or genuine dissent. It is always external forces or a natural disaster.
That pattern is undeniable. So what's the big takeaway for you, the listener? When you see a news report about a major political crisis somewhere in the world and you hear those buzzwords, external forces, color revolution, what questions should you immediately be asking?
I think there are 3 questions that are your best defense against this kind of narrative control. First, who benefits from this specific story? What does the person telling this story gain by blaming outsiders?
Good one. What's number 2?
Number 2, who is telling this story and what are their ultimate goals? Are they trying to gain legitimacy, maintain stability, consolidate control?
And the third one.
And the third, and this is the most critical, what deeper local factors are being ignored or deliberately buried by this focus on the external? You have to look inward before you accept the outward explanation.
That's fantastic advice. And we want to stress again, this discussion has been an objective analysis of competing narratives. We're not here to endorse any political side, just to give you the context and the critical framework to think for yourself.
Absolutely. The best defense is relentless critical thinking and always demanding multiple viewpoints.
And on that note, I think we'll call it a day. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the battle for memory. Please, if you enjoyed it, make sure you hit that subscribe button for Sip&Talk wherever you get your show.
We really appreciate you tuning in.
Oh, and also, please check out our good friend Mickey's YouTube channel. It's called Mickytolife. He does fun memes and great travel vlogs. It's a nice palate cleanser after a heavy topic like this.
Definitely check him out. We hope you'll carry these critical questions forward with you.
We'll catch you next time. Keep that critical thinking sharp.
Goodbye, everyone.